How's it going, everybody? This is Jason Ostrowski, and welcome to another episode of the Everything Real Estate Podcast. In today's podcast, we have a fantastic episode lined up for you with a very special returning guest. Many of you know him. His name is Jimmy Burgess. Jimmy is the CEO of BHHS Beach Properties of Florida. He is a staple contributor to Inman News, and he is the co-host of the Real Estate AI Flash podcast with our very own Rajiv Sajja. In today's episode, we will be discussing how the NAR settlement can be a season of separation for agents, and we're going to explore the implications of the National Association of Realtors' recent settlement and how it can serve as a turning point for agents looking to differentiate themselves in this competitive market. Jimmy is going to share his strategies to navigate this pivotal moment in the real estate industry as only he can. So let's get right into the conversation with Jimmy Burgess, and we'll pick it up on the other side. This is actually the fourth time you've been on, Jimmy. I can't believe this, but he is the CEO of BHHS Beach Properties of Florida, co-host of the Real Estate AI Flash podcast with our own Rajiv Sajja, and all-around paragon of the real estate industry. Now, I had to look up that word, and make sure that I pronounce it right. I had to go through it phonetically like 10 times. Yeah. But I am, of course, talking about our friend Jimmy Burgess. Jimmy, welcome back to the podcast. How are you, my friend?
Great, Jason. Listen, as somebody who does a weekly podcast, I just want to say thanks for your consistency with this. I know that people get value out of it. And I don't know if everybody knows how much work this is, but I do. And I appreciate how diligent you've been in bringing value to agents. So thank you for having me back, though, my friend.
Thanks, Jimmy. I appreciate that. We are coming up on our 100th episode, and I'm kind of like, my mind's blown because we're a bi-weekly podcast. So that means I've been doing this for a long time now. Yeah. So hopefully I've gotten a little better at it through the years since our first podcast together. But I think the last time that we spoke was about a year ago, and not much has changed since then, right? In the immortal words of Ron Burgundy, boy, that escalated quickly. So, today I think we're going to cover a topic that's on everybody's mind right now, and that is the NAR settlement. So you and I are going to focus on how the NAR settlement can be a season of separation for our agents. And so obviously, this is the ultimate relevant topic right now for realtors throughout the country. So with change comes opportunity, and you and I were talking about that, and we're going to touch upon some of those opportunities today and how you can separate from other agents. So Jimmy, let me start off with this very simple question. Why could this be a season of separation for agents?
I think that's the biggest question right now, Jason. And one of the things that is pretty exciting, if you're a seasoned agent or an agent that is looking to build a business, whether you're brand new or a seasoned agent, if you're looking to build something over time, especially something that is going to be pretty amazing, not just now, but into the future, this is that separation season that you were talking about. A couple things that affect that. Obviously, we're going to talk about the NAR changes, but this is kind of almost like a second wave. Growing up on the coast, you have where one wave comes in, which we already had the wave of less transactions, a slowing in the economy, just the general natural cycle in real estate. And then you have the second wave of the NAR settlement coming in. And I saw one statistic where in the first 6 months of 2024, there were 60,000 real estate agents net that got out of the business in the first 6 months. So that comes down to, when I break that down, that means every 4 minutes, somebody is getting out of real estate on a net basis. There's some people coming in, some people coming out on a net basis. So from that standpoint, you have to understand, as we've seen the transactions go down, what we're now seeing is that, in my opinion, we're probably bottoming on the transaction numbers, possibly maybe into next year sometime, but we're getting closer to the bottom. Obviously, we're closer than we were if we aren't there already. And so what we have is now we have, going forward, we're going to see the transactions get back to a more normalized, where you're going to have more opportunity on the number of transactions, and you're also going to have less competition because you're going to have less agents in the business when we come out on the other side of this. So my friend David Childers puts it this way, Jason. He tells this great story. It's just so appropriate right now, where he talks about how growing up in Georgia, his family were race car fans. And he said that literally, like, if you think about the pandemic, it was just do as much as you could, as fast as you could, because the opportunities were everywhere. And what he talked and he makes the analogy of is that's like driving, being a professional driver on the straightaway as a race car driver. So basically all you do on the straightaway, and there's not a lot of separation between the best drivers and the worst drivers because everybody's just got their foot buried into the bottom, basically pushing that gas pedal down as far as they can, and they're going as fast as they can. And there's not a lot of issues there. Everybody's just doing as much as they can. But then it's in the turns where the true champions are made, where they separate themselves from the average drivers. And I think that's where we are right now. So here's what professional drivers do and how we can relate this. Professional drivers come into that turn, so to speak. And what they do is they actually downshift. They slow down just a little bit to understand exactly what's happening. That's kind of what we're doing today. We're going to go through and talk about some specific language, mindset, what you can do to add value in a unique way. So we're slowing down a little bit to prepare ourselves for the turn. And once we see what's happening or we see that turn that's coming, what the professional drivers do is they pick a line or they decide what it is they're going to do, and they actually accelerate into that turn. Now, here's what happens for the majority of the people in a turn is that they don't downshift fast enough, and sometimes they come into the turn too fast and they hit the wall. Or they get into the turn and they realize, wait a minute, I'm in a bad situation here, and they slam on the brakes and they get hit from behind. The majority of the crashes that happen in race car driving happen in the turn. It's the same way in real estate. The majority of the people that have the most difficulty or then end up getting out of the business, it happens during the turn, which is where we are today. But here, by accelerating through when everybody else is panicking or freezing or they're running into the wall, so to speak, it's not if, it's when do we come out on and we get into another straightaway where everybody's just going wide open. So from that standpoint in the real estate business, now that you've picked your line and you accelerate in while everybody else is doing, when we come out on the other side, we're going to be separated. We're going to be so far ahead of all those other people that when we all push the gas pedal down, so to speak, you're going to be so far ahead of them that they can't catch you. So that's what we're doing. What we're looking at right now is from a separation season is professional agents always win. So winners always win. So what we want to do today is to equip you to be that professional agent and serve your clients at the highest level so that not if, but when we go back into another straightaway, you've separated yourself in a way that people can't catch you.
There's plenty of good points in what you just said. I do think, as I called it before, this is going to be the professionals market. And
Absolutely.
We're getting rid of the dabblers. And so you and I were talking about how this could be a great opportunity for those professional agents out there and what they should be focused on right now. Because again, there's work involved here. And
Yes.
Let's be honest, a lot of those dabblers, the people that do, and I qualify them as maybe they do 1-2 transactions a year. They're part-time. They have another full-time job. They don't want to focus on what they need to do to improve their business in order to move forward and take it to that next level as we get into this new realm of real estate that we're going to be in.
Right.
So you and I wanted to touch upon the little anecdote that I said right before we hopped on, talking about it from a listing standpoint, from a seller standpoint. And my wife was laughing at me because we were on vacation. I'm out in the driveway and I'm talking to one of my sellers that we had already signed listing paperwork for. And unfortunately for me, she got to talking to a lawyer, and a lawyer said to her, "Why are you paying a buyer commission?" And so we had to have that conversation, and she brought that up, and I was very happy to have that conversation because number one, transparency is key through this time, but also clarity. Why is it worth us to pay out a buyer broker commission? And so, Jimmy, I wanted to touch upon that first. I wanted to get your take on that. And again, adding to that separation that we talk about, how are we going to separate ourselves when it comes to sellers?
Yeah, so let's talk from a standpoint of really the mindset of this also, because if you're an agent that is fearful of that question, it's going to come through when you have those conversations. If you're an agent like what you said, where you were glad and excited to have that conversation. So let me give you some framework on this to where we can frame this in a way that really maybe will help you get past some of this. And also, I think sometimes what we'll do is they'll say something like that and we'll just go, vomit all of these things that we think we need to tell them about, and that's not even what they're asking. You know what I mean? And so I think it all starts with the framework. So this is what we have been coaching, and what we're seeing has been very helpful. Is a second that question comes, well, now I'm hearing that I don't have to pay the buyer side commission. And so really the thing is I'm really glad you brought that out, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. What is it that you've heard? So give them a second to tell you and clarify exactly what it is they've heard, because a lot of times once they tell you what they've heard, it's real easy to be able to answer that question. Sometimes we answer too many questions when they aren't even asked, and so we confuse it instead of bringing clarity. So anytime that we can get to a point where we understand exactly what the question is, we can then answer that question exactly. So starting out that way. Hey, listen, I'm really glad you brought that up, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. So I'm just curious, what is it that you've heard? And then let them tell you that. And then at that point, now we can begin to answer those questions. Now I'm going to answer this specifically. Let's say they came back and said, well, I talked to my lawyer and he told me that I shouldn't be paying a buyer side commission. And so how would I answer that? It would be that's interesting, because let me give you, listen, I'm not saying that you absolutely should, but what I want to do is my job is to give you the best information possible so that we can position you to get the best net dollar amount. And so let me give you some reasons why this may make sense. I'm going to just use ours, Jason, what we've seen here. I would encourage you while you still can, because this will last for just a few days. I went and researched basically out of 7,400 agents in the two different really big markets that we serve, our associations here. As of a week ago, there were 2 listings out of over 7,000 listings that were available and that were active right now that were offering 0 commission. So now let me just say this. So what I want you to understand is that absolutely you've had the ability forever not to have to pay the buyer side commission. I mean, you could list it for sale by owner and you don't have to pay any commission if that's the route you decide to go. But how does it position you to get the highest price possible? Because if we were to, in our market right now, understanding there's only 2 other places that are not offering buyer side commissions. If we were to not offer buyer side commissions right now, we would probably be putting you at a competitive disadvantage, because what we've done is we've eliminated a certain portion of the buying pool that is out there. Now, from that standpoint, again, we can absolutely not do this, but I want to see if I can answer any more questions that you have, because there are certain things that we can do where we can understand exactly what your net value is going to be, where we're going to bring clarity to that buyer and that buyer's agent. And by doing so, it gives them the ability to make an offer that is probably going to be a little more bold. Think of it this way. If I wake up in the middle of the night and the lights are off, I walk very gingerly. If the lights are on and I can see everything and I understand everything, I'm going to walk and move at a little bit more of a bold pace. So what this is doing is we're basically turning the lights on, so there's no questions here for that buyer or that buyer's agent exactly what it is that they're going to be looking at as far as their closing costs. And we're putting ourselves where we're not putting ourselves at a competitive disadvantage. Does this make sense to you? And what other questions do you have? Because obviously I think this is a conversation that is very healthy for us to have at this point. Does that make sense, Jason, where we're just basically, we're giving them an understanding of why. And then obviously this is where you come in as the professional agent and have your local stats. You have an understanding of what's going on. You have the understanding that, look, you don't have to pay any commission. But if you look, for sale by owner in our market historically has been receiving 10% less than what they have if they were listed with an agent on an average sales price. So from that standpoint, there's all these things we can do. But Jason, the key is understand what the true question is. And then from that standpoint, don't come from a defensive standpoint. Say, hey, look, you absolutely have that right, but let me give you some information so that you can make the best decision for your family.
Clarity is key. And the way that we get to clarity is our knowledge base, number one. Learning our value proposition, number 2. And as you had said, focus on the net. You're stealing the words like right out of my mouth, this conversation that I had with this seller. Let's focus on the net. If I can do the best possible job that I can to negotiate the best contract for you, for the highest price that you want to get with the terms that you want, this is why it's advantageous to offer a buyer broker commission, right? And because you're, in the end, you are going to net more money than this other strategy that you're talking about. And if I can provide value in what I say to them, it makes sense, it's clear, and it clicks. And that's kind of how our conversation went. By the end of the conversation, she was like, that makes a lot of sense. Let's do that. Jimmy, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do. I think every market is different. And I think a lot of this is going to be, I think if we were on the front end of the pandemic where, we were seeing everybody wanted to buy, it may be a little bit different situation also. I think some of this is going to ebb and flow with the market conditions. I mean, if you're in an area where there's no listings, I mean, look, it may make sense at some point to not offer that buyer side commission. But what you have to understand is our job is to give them the best information. And our job is to get as many people through the doors as possible, because that creates the opportunity for the potential for multiple offers, for negotiations that are in our favor. So all of those things play a factor in this. The key is to understand what exactly it is that you do on that side, be able to communicate that net value from that standpoint. And by getting more people through the doors, let's be real. I mean, this is ultimate. This is not about we win, they lose. If we're serving our clients at the highest level, I believe with my entire heart right now that offering a buyer side commission puts my seller in the best possible position to get the highest net price. If you don't believe that, then that's going to be difficult. It's not hard for me to say that because I believe it with all my heart. So from that standpoint, I think sometimes we've got to get ourselves where we have an understanding. And maybe if you're an agent that is struggling with this, you have to get to a place where you do the research enough to become that agent that understands the process. And then you've got to come from a place where you're doing exactly what you believe is absolutely best for your sellers and for your buyers. And I think once we do that, I mean, listen, even if you're working with a buyer and they've got to pay you a commission, I personally know the value that I bring as an agent on the buyer side from negotiating over 500 deals, from the ability to find off-market properties, from all those things that I do, then I don't have a problem communicating that, hey, listen, if the seller doesn't pay it, I'm going to be focused on your net dollar amount as well. And we're going to negotiate as hard as possible from a standpoint with my experience to a place where even if you have to come out of pocket for my commission, you will absolutely be in a better position with a better deal finding that ideal house. So I think it's just really understanding those things.
You have it down, to a T. Right. And that's because my next point that I want to bring up, I want to get into buyers as well. But you bring up a very important point as you're talking here. I was watching one of your YouTube videos with Tom Ferry this past week, and Tom brought up an excellent point about how we should always be practicing. We should be practicing what we say, our scripts. When he does his coaching sessions, he's always having these kind of conversations with his clients. And he brought up a very specific point about some of his friends are neurosurgeons. And those neurosurgeons practice all the time in what they do. And thank God that they do, because if they didn't, there would probably be a lot less fortunate people out there. So I would say to you, how are we any different? We need to practice what we actually say to our clients. And listening to you, you're a master at that, of communication and that scripting. So with your agents down in Florida, are you practicing your scripting all the time? How are you utilizing kind of the new era that we're going in? And what are you doing to affect that change?
Yeah, so a couple things there. Yes, we have had meetings where we had scripts laid out. But look, I don't even know that scripting is the right words here. I think because, scripts can come off, cold. I think you just have to know it so well and have some bumpers in that conversation through scripting. But what we did is we had sales meetings where we went, myself and Jennifer Ledesma, our Vice President of Brokerage Operations, and our, broker of record, we went into different offices in groups of 10 to 12. And we sat down and we asked the questions and had them role play in front of everybody. Now you're saying, well, that's really uncomfortable. Let me tell you what's even more uncomfortable: to be sitting with a prospect and get asked a question that you can't answer because you're practicing on the prospect. So I would just encourage you. Now, look, what's great about the day we live in, you mentioned Tom Ferry. When Tom Ferry picked me up from the hotel for us to go do that interview, he's got ChatGPT and he's role playing with ChatGPT because he's practicing these things himself. We've got everything now. I mean, listen, Rajiv has got a setup right now through a custom GPT. If you just go in and you search for Rajiv Saja on ChatGPT under Explore GPTs, he's got one already set up where you can start practicing and utilizing everything that's available with artificial intelligence right now. So you don't have to wait on somebody else. You can do this on your own. But you're absolutely right. The worst thing that can happen is for the first time that you have this conversation, to be with a prospect. Because listen, the old idea of fake it till you make it is not the way to go here. You need to absolutely have been doing these things. And you mentioned that, why does it roll off for me? Well, it's because literally, Jason, for the last 90 days, I've had this type of a conversation with agents where we were role playing this, where they would ask me, I would basically, we did a hot seat where a group of agents came in and I said, ask me the question you hope nobody ask you. Now, I got to tell you, when some of them asked me those questions, I said, this is why we're doing this, because I stumbled. And so but if I'm going to stumble, I'd rather stumble around other agents instead of stumbling in front of a buyer or a seller. So yes, you're absolutely right. The key to all of this is being prepared in a way, because preparation builds your confidence. And listen, people know. I mean, when you walk in there and they ask you a question, you say, I'm really glad you asked that. They know whether you're just saying that or whether you absolutely are glad that they asked that because you want to bring clarity to this situation.
Well, going back to what lawyers do, right? They never ask a question they don't know the answer to.
That's right.
And it's kind of like in reverse, right? We're going, how many times, to our agents listening out there, how many times have you gone into a listing appointment and you feel so confident that when you walk in that door, you know you have that listing because you have mastered the objections that you think you are going to face. And you've done this for a long time. You've heard everything from a seller about objection-wise, how to handle those different kind of conversations that you're going to have. Now we're going to have some new conversations, and it's about mastering those new conversations, but we're all going to get there. And so if we keep doing what we're talking about today. So I wanted to get
go ahead, Jimmy. Let me just say this, because I talk to a lot of companies across the country. And I have, obviously, and I've got a great relationships with a ton of your leadership, with the leadership team at Fox and Roach. I don't know that there's a company that's doing more right now to prepare agents. So I would just encourage you, lean into your local manager, lean into the other agents in your office, because this is one of those times where, look, the leadership team you have around you is critically important. So make sure that you're leaning in and that you're utilizing those things that are out there. Look, a lot of the stuff, obviously, the entire teaching team that y'all have has done an amazing job. I've modeled some of the stuff we're doing here from that. So, I mean, just lean in. Just don't get surprised by this. Just if you'll prepare now. And the crazy thing is, unfortunately, we're in an industry where I don't know that even half of the agents even understand the change that's coming. So if you're prepared, again, when others are not prepared, you're really going to have a separation right now that maybe I haven't seen in 15 years in our industry, with an opportunity to really separate yourself.
I think that's my biggest frustration with all of this is that, like you had mentioned, and again, I don't want to get off on a negative tangent here, but I do think that there is a bulk of agents out there who are not prepared for this. And so for those of us that are, again, I see opportunity. I'm going to be just fine. You have to worry about what you're going to be doing out there and how you're going to better yourself for this change that's coming. So again, if I say that and we talk about mindset, let's get into mindset a little bit, because again, I get a lot of hand wringing out there. I hear agents talking about how, in a negative way, how this is going to impact us. Let's talk about mindset and why it's so important when it comes to these changes that are going to take place.
Yeah, it's the most important thing. The actions you take are based on what you truly believe. So the question is, do you truly believe that this is an opportunity? And if you don't, look, that's fine. I would say every single person, there's almost like, you hear that there's these levels of grief, or there's this process of grief. I think there's a little bit of that right now in our industry, because the way things there's almost a longing for the way things used to be. And so I think a lot of agents find themselves in this like purgatory of wishing they were there, but understanding that this is where they need to go, and they're just not doing anything. So from a mindset perspective, I would just encourage you, surround yourself with the people that are going to have the mindset you're looking for. Who are those people that are excited about this? Get around those folks. What is it? Ask them the questions. What is it they're excited about? I almost found like with us in our local company, it was like the top producers, they were mostly 95% of them were extremely excited about this change. The people that were not excited about this were the people that either were not flexible enough to make changes, or maybe that they've never been through a normal market cycle where they understand that this is the time where you can start making some changes and make a difference here. But just understand, if you aren't in that place yet, begin to flood your mind with the training from positive people that are excited about this, and you'll start moving in that direction. That's the key is you've got to be moving in the direction, if you're not excited, to get excited about this.
I myself and talking to agents it's let's focus on it. It is what it is, right? Like you had said, people long for the past. The past is the past. And so we have to move forward here. I imagine that this conversation is a lot like it was when in our neck of the woods, buyer agency came into play. And
yes.
No more sub agency, and everything was changing, and the world is crashing around you. Sometimes we make things out to be more than it is. Right? If you do the right thing, you focus on the right things, you're going to be perfectly fine in this business no matter what. And so you will find your path through. And we are a creative bunch. That's one thing I will say about realtors. We are creative. We find new ways to market ourselves. We find new ways to do things. And the same is going to happen here. So one of those big changes, Jimmy, that we're going to talk about now is on the buying side. Because this presents unique opportunities, especially on the buying side now, to have a unique value proposition when you talk to your buyers out there. So, Jimmy, how are you coaching your agents down there to effectively win more buyers in this situation?
Yeah. Now, listen, you hear this all the time where you've got to be able to communicate your value. But let me say this, that's one thing to be able to say that. But what is it that you actually do? I don't know. I think it's a mutual friend of ours, Andrew Undum, and I. We were texting this morning. Actually, I'm going to jump on with him. So probably by the time this airs on your podcast, we'll have that video live where Andrew is. He leads a team of 5. That does almost 500 transactions. He's going to walk through his process of presenting the value to the buyer, but I'm going to give you what we're doing. But I would encourage you, go find that video, or I'll get you the link once we get it live, because he's as good as I've seen with the sequencing of that process and understanding how to communicate that. Couple of things. What is it that you do different? Okay. You have to understand. I'll give you an example. I haven't done this in a while, but I want to get back in the dirt a little bit. You know what I mean? I missed selling a little bit. So I had a friend of mine that had sent me a text and said, "Hey, are you still in sales? Or are you completely out of sales?" And I said, if it's somebody that you've got, I'd love to kind of work and see if I can help them. And so I actually was out showing property this weekend, Jason. First, it's like riding a bike, though. I'll be honest. After 500 transactions, it's kind of fun. But I found myself, and part of it was I wanted to see what those conversations were. And so I asked the buyer, I was like, so tell me what it is that you've heard, because his first question was, am I going to have to pay for the commission? And I said, and so that was the initial thing. And I said, well, potentially, but let me just say this. Here are the things that I'm going to do where no matter what it is, where it's going to be of the most value to you. Number one is, as I said, as you're noticing what we're seeing this weekend is, then I'm not going to wait around to find something that is going to pop up on the MLS, going to be a great deal, and we're going to have to compete on. 2 of the 3 places that we're seeing this weekend are off-market deals. So what I'm communicating from that standpoint is hey, odds are the place that we find that's perfect for you, we may find it in MLS, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to come from a place where I'm going to find you the place, whether it's on the market or not. So how did I do that? Here's what I did. And I'm just communicating this. And if I'm sitting with a buyer today, I'm communicating this. I'll give you an example. This past weekend, I had someone that was coming in from out of town. They wanted to buy a place on the Gulf in our area. They specifically liked a certain subdivision. So we could not find anything that fit the criteria they had. There were about 30 homes that were Gulfront in this gated subdivision that this person wanted to be in. There were also 2 vacant lots. So what I did is I went back and I looked at the history of those sales. And I found out that one of the lots sold 2.5 years ago. I happen to know the other agent because I've got relationships with others agents, because right now, in order for me to find the ideal place, it's not just my network that I need to be helping with. It needs to be all the other agents. So consequently, this is what I did. I called her and I said, hey, I know you sold this place about 2.5 years ago. Now, listen, you can call these owners if you're that person. I just had a great relationship with that other agent, so it was easier for me to do it that way. I called that agent. I said, hey, I saw where your folks bought this place roughly about 2 years ago. Just curious. I noticed they haven't built on that lot. Just curious if they might be in a position where they might consider selling this place. Jason, we ended up with that situation where now I drew up a $3 million offer, cash, close in 30 days for that off-market property. Now, this is a place that you have to understand that was not on the market. So if I'm sitting with the buyer's agent, I'm going to say, hey, listen, perfect example. I'm so glad you asked that. Let me tell you what I do a little different. I'm going to give you an example of what I did this past weekend. I had someone that came in. They wanted to be in a specific area. I'm not going to wait on that to show up on the market because we saw what was on the market and nothing fit. So what I did is I began to look at what were the sales that had previously happened. I contacted some of those other agents that I have a great relationship with. And I said, hey, would your sellers consider selling? So within 48 hours of understanding exactly what that buyer needed, I didn't keep looking in the MLS hoping that something would come. I actually went out and made it happen. And that's what I'm going to do for you. When we identify the area and the type of property you're looking for, I'm going to be relentless in finding that perfect home for you. Now, what does that look like? That was one example where I called the agent. There were other houses that had not been on the market or not had sold in the last little while. I utilized and contacted and found through the tax records the contact information for those homeowners. And this is the conversation that I had. Hey, this is Jimmy Burgess with Berkshire Hathaway Home Services. Just wanted to give you a call. I noticed you have a place there in this specific subdivision on the Gulf. I have I have a buyer that is specifically looking for that area. He's willing to pay up to $5.5 million for the right house. And I'm just curious if you have heard of any of your neighbors that might consider selling. Now, listen, notice I didn't even ask them if they want to sell. And part of the reason is if they're thinking about it, I'll promise you, Jason, they're going to tell you. You know what I mean? But what I did is I had the conversation open, okay? Now, in that situation, I had a few people said, no, actually, I haven't heard of anybody. We love it down there. I said, I don't blame you. I would love it too. If it doesn't come up about their place, this is the very framework that you want to use at the end of that conversation. I would be the worst, before we get off the phone, I would be the worst realtor in the world if I didn't at least ask if there's a price where you guys might consider selling. You'd be amazed at what that does to open up those doors, okay? Now, I'm telling you this from a standpoint because I'm going to get back to the buyer presentation, but I think you need to be equipped to be able to do these things before you can tell people you can do these things, okay? So let me get back now to this focus. It's just funny that you asked this question. Literally, I'm 24 hours away from literally driving a neighborhood and calling owners. So here's the situation. If I'm sitting with that buyer and they're like, what is going to be the difference? And I'm communicating that. Well, let me tell you a few things that I do differently because, listen, I'm absolutely going to be on top of anything that comes on the market. But you have to understand that in the case of what happens right now, the majority of the transactions that happen right now in our marketplace are happening with off-market properties. So here's what I do to set myself apart. I've built a network of agents over my career that I have a great relationship with. So I have a group of agents when I have a specific buyer that's looking for this, then I'm going to call and I'm going to check in with those and say, hey, listen, I got a buyer that's ready to buy if we can just find the right place. Have you heard of anything that's coming on the market, in this case, Gulffront, in this specific area? And then if they say, no, but I heard so-and-so did this, I'm following that path with those agents. If they don't have people, what I'm going to do is as we see properties and we hone in on the neighborhood that you want to be in, is I'm going to make a list of all the homeowners that have houses that fit the criteria you're looking for. And I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to start calling those folks. And I'm going to make sure that I'm going to be relentless in finding that ideal place for you and your family. Once I know what that ideal place is, a lot of agents are going to sit back and wait. That's not what I'm going to do. Also, you have to understand, for me personally, I've negotiated over 500 sales in my career. So from that standpoint, I'm going to have that opportunity really to understand how to negotiate in a way that gets you the best terms for the ideal place that you're doing with the least amount of hassles. Also, you're a buyer that is probably looking to do some specific financing. I've got relationships with lenders where I know the ideal product for each person that puts us in a position beforehand so that we can negotiate and make our offer stand out ahead of other offers if we get into a multiple offer situation, which oftentimes we will when we're looking at a perfectly priced property in this current environment. So from that standpoint, what I just want to do is I want to make sure you understand that whatever it takes to find that ideal home for you and your family, whatever the experience that is needed that I need to tap back into, I've got that experience and I'm excited to go to work for you and your family on this transaction. Now listen, everybody, Jason, needs to put this in their own words. If you don't have 500 transactions like I do, tap into the network of people that you have. I'll give you another example. I coordinate for us. We have a text group where we text out any buyer needs or off-market property opportunities. We got 150 agents on that. So me communicating to the buyers and saying, hey, look, immediately when I do this, I'm going to have that capability, from that standpoint. So just be able to communicate whatever it is you do differently and have it on lock. You may even have this sheet. I've got it, I think, right here. We did this where I put together actually a buyer's your portfolio that basically talks about the resources. So it has this set up. This doesn't have to, this could be something that you could do. This talks about our partnerships. This talks about the leadership team. This talks about different marketing things that we're doing. That's the seller one. On the buyer side, it's going to have the information about the agent. It's going to have a lot of the buyer side actual testimonials so that we're framing this in a way where they understand, look, we're not just another agent. We're a professional agent. This is what we do, and we do it extremely well, and we're excited to go to work for you. Does that make sense, Jason, from that standpoint?
Absolutely. And the thing I love that you do in general, Jimmy, is that you always tell a story. You have real world examples. People gravitate to real world examples. My buyers kind of make fun of me at this point, some of them that I've been working with for a long time, because they're like, oh, Jason's got another story. But they know that I have real world experience in what they're dealing with, and that they can kind of lean on me for that. They can trust me. They can like me to find what they're looking for. You talk about off-market deals. You have to find that differentiator on the buying side. I know for me, I have my buyer presentation down. I've had it down for years. And now with some tweaks to that, I've been in it just weirdly. I've been in competition for buyers because I get Google leads, right? And they say, hey, we're interviewing. Yeah. When they say we're interviewing other agents, my eyes light up because I know that they're not doing what I'm doing on the buying side. And I'm not trying to brag about anything, but I'm just saying, like, usually, if not always, I will win out in those situations because I know those other agents aren't prepared for that buyer conversation and that buyer timeline that I have and that buyer presentation that I have. We go through things for a solid hour together. And I want them to know the process, know that they, that I have it down flat, that they're going to have it down flat by the time that we're done discussing things. And it usually leads to the outcome that I want, and we work together. So I think that's really important. I want to, before we get out of here, because I know you're running short on time, I wanted to get your perspective on a couple things. So if you're looking into Jimmy's crystal ball here, right, into the future, what do you think is going to be the defining quality for those that will thrive in this new market compared to agents that will fail?
Persistence. And here's the thing. If you've ever wondered, I almost feel like this business sets you up in a way where a lot of people, especially now, I think what happened during the pandemic, we had a lot of people come into the business that maybe had success in other areas before, and they came in at a time where it was easy because they saw everything, and now they're like, whoa, wait a minute, this business is not as easy as I thought. Or maybe there's an agent out there that really maybe has been in the business for a while, went through the season where it was so easy, and maybe those marketing chops, so to speak, those negotiation chops, so to speak, or that presentation that we used to do, maybe you've just gotten a little bit of atrophy, I guess you could say, where you just haven't used it in a while, and so consequently it's not as good. So here's the key is as we go forward, is we talked about this when we started, about picking your line, so to speak, and accelerating into this turn. So what is it that you're going to do to prepare yourself? And here's the thing also is that persistence, it's not a matter of if this business is going to gut punch you, it's going to. It's not a matter if this business is going to humble you, it's going to. Every single one of us goes through this. And I almost feel like it is the bigger the resistance that you feel like you're having as an agent, the bigger, once you get through that, the results you're going to have that are going to be successful. So from that standpoint, you have to come with a commitment that no matter what happens, I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to add value in a unique way. I'm going to be the professional that's different from everybody else. And I'm going to continue consistently to push past any of the headwinds I have. Jason, I'll close with this. I'll give you a story. Like you said, I always got a story, right? So college, I played college golf. And when I was in college, I had this situation where I was not necessarily the most talented player. My roommate was an All-American, but I was always one of those that I was always looking for little ways that I could get ahead. You know what I mean? And so what I did in that situation is that I began to think about what is the difference that I could make that was subtle. I had an English professor that said, "Hey, you need to write a paper on an inanimate object, the history of it, and where it is today." So what did I do? I wrote it on the golf ball. So as I began, because I'm thinking, well, if I could just understand the golf ball better, maybe it can help me get a little bit of an edge. So what I did is I began to look back, and in the 1600s, roughly, when golf was started in Scotland and in that area in the UK, basically what they did is they started with a wooden, perfectly round, unblemished golf ball, and that was the type of golf ball they had. And what they found is that after a little while, they would hit the ball where they'd get these blemishes on it. And they kept pulling the ball out and they get a new round one. Well, then all of a sudden, about 6 months in, they realized that some of the best players were actually still playing with these balls that had these cuts or these nicks on them, from when they had been mishit, or they had been hit indifferently. And they were trying to figure that out. And what they found out is that actually the balls that had the blemishes on them could actually travel further than the others. And if you'll see a golf ball today, there's not a single piece of it that is perfect. It has the dimples on it. The reason being is that when a golf ball is hit and it goes into the resistance of the wind, or it hits the wind, what they found is the blemishes, the dimples, the imperfections actually helped it break through that headwind and go further than it would have otherwise. So I think what we're finding right now, and what I would encourage agents to understand is that this is a change. This is a different market than it was 3 to 4 years ago. There are new skills that you need to develop. But what you have to understand is that those of us that have been doing this for a little while, or maybe you're brand new and you've just been being beat up a little bit by this business, every single time that person didn't list with you that was a friend of yours that you thought you were going to get, Nick, that was a Nick. Every single time that you had that thing fall apart right before the closing, Nick, that was another Nick. What you have to understand is that all of those things that you felt like were so hard, were keeping you from being everything that you could be in this business, they were actually the very imperfections, the nicks, those cuts, those things that were difficult. They're actually the very thing that's going to help propel you through the headwinds that we've got in this business right now and become everything that you're supposed to be in this business. So the key is to understanding that persistence is that every time you get hit with one of those surprises or those letdowns or those things, understand it is just preparing you, if you learn the lesson and you stay persistent, to take you to a whole other level. Jason, listen, as we come into this season of separation right here, now is the time. I say this all the time, but I truly do believe this is it. I'm seeing with some of our agents, somebody is going to have their best year ever in real estate right now, this year. Why not you? Why not this be the time that you take the time to separate yourself, prepare yourself, and to provide more value than ever done? Because in my case now, 30 years in this business, every single time we got to one of these times, the person who's going to be the leading agent in certain markets, in every market, is probably not the person it was 3 years. It's going to be the person who does the persistent things right now. That's who's going to be the leader 3 years from now.
I tell you what, Jimmy, you got me ready to get up, run through a wall, and go door knocking all my neighborhood, and I hate door knocking. So you got me all motivated, man. So I know you got to get out of here. One last question, because I always end with an offbeat question. So what question do you, Jimmy Burgess, get tired of answering the most in your travels?
That's a good one. I'll tell you what I get is when agents come in and say, "I just don't understand why it's not happening for me," and let me tell you why. And this is not a knock, but a lot of times what will happen is I will say, "Okay, well, let's look at your schedule for the last week. What have you done to make it happen?" And a lot of times what's happening is we got a lot of people that are waiting on it to happen. And let me just say this isn't the market to wait on it to happen. There will be a time where we will get back, because the pendulum always swings. But where we are right now, if you're waiting on it to happen, then it's probably going to be very difficult. Hey, my buddy Andrew, I mentioned Andrew Unum earlier. He had a great line with this. He said, you know what? When he's adding people to his team, he said what he's looking for is outdoor cats. You know what the difference between an outdoor cat and an indoor cat is? Outdoor cat wakes up every morning and realizes, look, I got the freedom to either lay in the shade, but if I'm going to eat today, I got to go kill something. And then the indoor cat, what does the indoor cat do? Indoor cat sits and waits on somebody to feed them. Typically, they're a little overweight. They're lazy. And so what I want to see is what is it that I can do to wake up every morning to understand that, look, I got the freedom to do whatever I want. I'm going to choose to do something today that my future self is going to thank me for. And I think if we can focus on those things, don't ask the questions of why is it not happening for me, begin to take the action in a way that instead of being reactive to what's happening, you begin to be proactive in making things happen.
Well, I'll tell you what, Jimmy, thank you so much for doing this. If you are not aware of Jimmy Burgess and you are in the real estate industry, you are missing out, because Jimmy's advice, as you see on this podcast, is so helpful to what we do. And I want to thank you for always being willing to hop on here with me. I know you are a very busy man. Check out Jimmy on YouTube. Check out Jimmy with Rajiv on the AI Flash podcast. Check him out on Inman. Check him out everywhere. You'll probably see him at the next convention that we have. Pop by and say hi. He's everywhere. Jimmy, thank you so much again for doing this.
Thanks, Jace.
That was the conversation with Jimmy Burgess this week. Here are a few takeaways that I had from talking with Jimmy. Number one, Jimmy points out this is the most important thing, and I agree with him, and that is your mindset. We always talk about mindset on the podcast. Jimmy talks about embracing the change, and we need to embrace the change, and by doing that, we make ourselves better agents who are going to better serve our clients, and ultimately, we're going to get more business out of it if we work on our skills when it comes to sellers, if we work on our skills when it comes to buyers. The new paperwork that's coming out, master that. Have a conversation with your fellow agents about objections that you might face in the marketplace. Be prepared. All this will make you a better agent and gain you more business in order to differentiate yourself from the competition. Number two, when it comes to our sellers, we may be having some brand new conversations with them when we go out on listing appointments. But typically, the most important conversation that you're ultimately going to have with a seller is, what are they walking away with? What are their proceeds from the transaction? And that's where you need to show your sellers what you're going to do to net them the most money out of the transaction. And that could be a bunch of different strategies. But ultimately, that will be the key aspect of your listing presentation and how to best move forward in order to make it to their best benefit. So work on your language, work on your skills when it comes to your sellers. If we now shift our focus over to the buying side, you very well may now be in more direct competition with other buyer agents vying for buyers' business. So you need to think about how you're going to differentiate yourself. How are you going to go above and beyond past what everybody else is doing in order to secure that buyer's business and do the best job that you can do for them? It's also providing value, right? Because ultimately, if, let's just say, a seller is not paying a buyer broker a commission, you have to earn that commission from your buyer. You have to provide that value in order to be paid. So what are you going to work on to differentiate yourself on the buying side, whether that's a killer buyer presentation, whether that's offering different unique strategies that help your buyer find the home that they're looking for that other agents may not be doing. And so we have to identify those things and then put them into practice in our business in order to succeed. Well, that's it for the podcast this week. We will be back in another couple of weeks with a new topic, a new guest, and as always, if you want to hear something that we haven't covered yet, please reach out to me, jason.ostrowski@foxroach.com. And if you haven't liked or subscribed or left a review for the podcast yet, please do so. It helps us to reach more people. Once again, this is Jason Ostrowski saying stay safe out there, stay selling, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Everything Real Estate Podcast.